Sourabh, I've got you here from UpTrain. I think you have some notes that you wanted to present, but I also want to ask you a few questions because we are going to be diving into a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I think it's been coming up so much recently. That is using LLMs as a judge. It is really hot these days. Some have even gone as far to say that it is the topic of 2024. I would love for you to dive in. Let's just get right to it, man. What are some of the key topics when you're talking about using LLMs to evaluate? What key metrics are you using? How does this work? Can you break it down?
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me. And no worries for hiccup. I guess I have never seen a demo or a talk which goes without any technical hiccups. Like, it is bound
That's
to
it.
happen.
Oh,
And really excited to be here. Really excited to talk about LLM evaluations. And as as you rightly pointed, right? Like, it's really a hot topic, and rightly so, right?
hmm.
The the way things have been panning out with LLMs and ChatGPT and GPT-4 and so on is that people started building all these prototypes, right? And the way to evaluate them was just eyeball them, like just trust your gut feeling, go with the vibe,
Vibes.
and
Yeah.
yeah, just just I guess like they truly adopted the startup methodology, like push things out to production and break things. But what people have been realizing is that it's not scalable, right? Rightly so, it's highly subjective. It's a developer, it's a human who is looking at all the responses. Someday he might like this, someday he might like something else.
Yeah.
And it's not possible for them to kind of, go over, just read through more than 10 responses.
Yeah.
And now the unique thing about production use cases is that they need continuous refinement. You need to keep on improving them. You need to keep on improving your prompt or your retrieval, your embedding model, your retrieval mechanisms, and so on. So that presents a case like you have to use a more scalable technique. You have to use LLMs as a judge because that's scalable. You can have an API call, and if that API call gives good quality results, it's a way you can mimic whatever your human is doing, or in a way augment them, which can truly act as their co-pilot.
Yeah. So, one question that's been coming through my head when I think about using LLMs as a judge and I get more
Mhm.
into it has been around when do we use those API calls? It's not in the moment that we're looking for this output, is it? Like just to see if this output is real, and then before we show it to the user, it's kind of in bunches after
Yeah.
we've gotten a bit of feedback from the user. So that means that certain use cases are automatically discarded from this, right? Like if we are thinking, all right, we're going to use LLMs as a judge to make sure that we're mitigating hallucinations or that we are evaluating better, it is not necessarily something that we can do in the moment if I'm understanding it correctly. So can you break that down a little bit more? Like how does it actually look in practice?
Yeah, definitely, definitely, and that's a great point. So, the way I see it, like there are three cases. Like case one is what you mentioned, in the moment, like before showing the response to the user, you want to check whether the response is good or not. In most of the scenarios, you can't do that because obviously checking requires extra time, and you don't want to add latency.
Yep.
But there are some cases, let's say, related to safety, right? Like you want to check whether the user is trying to jailbreak your LLMs or not. So
Yeah.
in that case, what you can do is you can do this evaluation in parallel to the generation, because based on just the
Mhm.
user query you can check whether the intent is to jailbreak or it's a it's an intent to actually use your product to kind of utilize it for the particular model purpose. But
Nice.
for most of the other evaluations like relevance, hallucinations, quality, and so on, like it has to be done post whatever you show to the users. So, and then there you can do it in two ways. Like you can either experiment with, like use them to experiment with things, or you can run monitoring on your production and find out failure cases. And typically we are seeing like developers are adopting a combination of these two to find cases and then experiment and then improve their systems.
Okay, so when you're doing it in parallel, that feels like something that is just asking is this trying to, you craft a prompt, and as soon as, so you're basically sending out two prompts. One thing, another piece that I have been thinking about is, like, doesn't this just add a bunch more cost to your system? Because
Yeah,
you're like, there you're effectively doubling your cost,
yeah,
but then later on I can imagine you can craft a few different ways of making the evaluations and sending out the responses to the LLM better,
yeah.
I guess, and you can figure out how to trim some tokens off, or you can try and like concatenate some of the responses and do tricks there. I'm sure there's all kinds of tricks that you know about that I don't, and I'd love to tell you to tell me about them. But like,
Definitely, yeah.
what kind of costs are we looking at? How much of an increase can we expect?
Yeah. So I think yeah, that's like a I mean a very valid limitation of evaluation. So that's why let's say at UpTrain, like what we truly believe in is that like you don't want to use like an expensive model like GPT-4 for evaluation because I mean then the cost adds up and it does not work out, right? Like if you are spending more on evaluating the responses, it doesn't like you may as well like just like do something else, like have a human to generate the responses.
Yeah.
So like we rely on like smaller models on cheaper models for this. And secondly, the methodology which we adopt is that you don't want to evaluate everything on all the data points. Like maybe you have like a higher level check, let's say for jailbreak or let's say for the final response quality. And when you find cases where the quality is low, you run a battery of checks on these failures to figure out where which part of the pipeline is exactly failing. Like this is something what we call as like root cause analysis, where you take all these failure cases, which maybe like 10% or 20% of the cases out of all what you are seeing in production. Take these 10 to 20% cases, run like a battery of checks on them. They might be exhaustive. You might run like 5 to 10 checks on them, and then based on those checks you can figure out that what is the error mode. Is it a retrieval problem? Is it a citation problem? Is it a utilization problem? Is it hallucination? Is the query, like the question asked by the user, is it not clear enough? Is it like your embedding model is not appropriate? So that's how you can kind of take best of the two. Like you can also improve the performance at the same time, make sure that you don't burn a hole in your pocket.
I've also heard this before, and it's almost like you're using the LLMs as tests, and they're helping you write. It's not that they're helping you write tests, it's that they are there and they're part of the tests that you're writing.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I think the key here is that you have to use them objectively. Like what I have seen is like a lot of people who are trying to do LLM evaluations, what they do is like they ask the LLM that okay, this is my response. Can you tell is it relevant or not? Right? Or even let's say they go a step beyond and do like a grading thing that is it like highly relevant, somewhat relevant, highly irrelevant,
Mhm.
right? But then it becomes very subjective, right? It depends upon the LLM to decide whether it's relevant or not. Rather than that, you have to transform into an objective setting. You have to break down the response into like individual facts and just see whether each fact is relevant for the question or not. And then, take some sort of a ratio to get the final score. So that way, like all the biases which comes up into the picture, like, egocentric bias where LLM prefers its own outputs, those biases can be mitigated to a large extent. And I believe that's the key for making making LLM evaluations work, because similar to LLM applications, even LLM evaluations, like you have to put in a lot of efforts to make them really work and like finally get some scores which align well with human expectations.
Mhm. It's funny how these LLMs mimic humans so much. They love the sound of their own voice, even. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
So, dude, well, talk to me a little bit more about how this looks in practice, because there's a lot of different techniques that you can do. Also, I do realize that when it comes to the use cases, it's
Mm-hmm.
very different, right? So, like, if it's code generation use case and you're evaluating that, it's going to be pretty clear, did the code run or did it not? And then
Yeah.
you can go into some details on, is this code actually like more valuable, is it a hacked way to do it, et cetera, et cetera. But there's use cases that I would consider more sensitive and less sensitive, and so how do you look at that type of thing?
Yeah. I think so the way even we think about evaluations is I mean, there's no one size fit all solution. Like you
Mhm.
have to, like for different use cases, you need to look at different things. And even if you, let's say, looking at hallucinations, different use cases or different businesses would look at evaluations from different lenses, right? They might, like for someone, whatever, like, if they are focusing a lot on certain aspects of the correctness, someone else would focus less on those aspects and more on other aspects. So, so the way we think about it is like, we define different criteria for different use cases. So if you have a Q&A bot, right? So you look at the quality of the response, the quality of the context. If you have a conversational agent, then you look at the quality of the conversation as a whole. You look at whether the user is satisfied with that conversation. If you are writing long form content, like you look at coherence across the content, you look at the creativity or the sort of the interestingness of the content. If you have an AI agent, you look at like, how well they are able to plan, how well they were able to execute a particular task and so on. How many steps do they take to achieve their objective? So there are like a variety of these evaluation matrices, which are each one of which is like more suitable for different use cases. And even there, I believe like, a good tool needs to provide certain customization abilities to their developers so that they can transform it, they can modify it in a way that it makes most sense for their business.
Yeah. Is there certain ones that you feel like are more prevalent and that like if I'm just thinking about this, I'm developing on the side and I'm thinking about this right now and I'm like, well, how could I start? What would you recommend?
Yeah, definitely. I think like so one of the biggest use case for LLMs today is RAG applications.
Yeah.
So I think like and if for RAG, I think retrieval is the key. So I think the best starting points in terms of evaluations is like look at the response quality. So look at the relevance of the response, look at the completeness of the response, look at the context quality. So like context relevance, which like judges the retrieval quality, hallucinations, which judges like whether the response is grounded by the context or not. In some like if tone matters for your use case, like look at the tonality, and finally like look at the conversation satisfaction, because at the end, whatever outputs you give, like you also need to judge whether the end user is satisfied with these outputs. So I would say like these 4 5 matrices are the best way for any developer to start who is building on top of these LLMs. And from there, like, you can like understand how the behavior is going, and then you can go more deeper, look at more nuanced metrics, which can help you understand your systems even better.
Yeah, I like that. Now, one thing that has also been coming up in my head a lot are like the custom metrics and custom evaluation, and
Mm-hmm.
also proprietary data set, like evaluation data sets, because as we all know, like the benchmarks get gamed and you see on
Yeah.
Twitter, oh wow, this new model just came out, it's so good. And then you try it and you're like, what are you talking about? This thing just was trained on the benchmarks. And so it seems like it's good, but it's not. And can you talk to us about like creating these evaluation data sets? What have you seen as far as the best ways of going about it? What kind of size? Like, how many do we need to actually make it valuable? And what is that like? Give us a breakdown there.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, surprisingly, the answer is that, like, you don't need that many to get started. Like, we
Mm,
have seen cases where even if someone builds like a test data sets of like 50 to 100 samples, that's actually like a very good starting point than where they were, like, in terms of manual annotation. And in terms of creation of this data set, like, I believe that the best data set is what actually your users are asking. You can look at public benchmarks, you can like generate some synthetic data, but none of them matches the quality of what actually your end users are looking, because those are going to give you issues which you can never anticipate, right? Even you're generating the synthetic data, you have to anticipate what issues can come up and generate data beyond that. If you're looking at public data sets, they're highly curated, there is always problems of like them leaking into the training data and so
yeah.
on. So it's those benchmarks becomes highly reliable. So look at your traffic, like take 50 samples from them. If you are collecting user feedback, so the cases where the user has like downvoted or the user has not accepted the response, I mean they are very good cases to look at. or if you're running some evaluations, quality checks on that, cases which are failing, I think they are the best starting point for you to have a good quality test data sets and use that as a way to experiment with your prompts, experiment with your systems, experiment with your retrievals, and iteratively improve them.
Are you weighing any metrics more than others? Because I've heard stories about how sometimes you'll see that a new model will come out or you're testing out a new model and it seems like on certain metrics it's gone down, but then the golden metric that you have, it actually has gone up. And so have you seen which metrics are better for different use cases?
I think for here, there's no single answer. Like, I think that metric depends upon the business. Generally speaking, what we have been seeing is that the better context you retrieve, the better your model becomes. Especially like if you're using any of the like the bigger models, like any of the GPT or Claudes, or like to some extent like even Mistral is like highly performant. So if you're
Mhm.
using any of these highly performant models, then if you give them the right context, the response more or less like it comes out to be good. So I think one thing which we are seeing people focusing a lot on experimenting with different retrieval mechanisms, embedding models, and so on. But then again, like the final golden key, I think many people we have seen like they annotate some data sets, so they have like a ground truth response or a golden response, and they completely rely on just like how well their answer matches with that golden response, which I
Hmm.
believe like that's a very good that's a very good starting point because like now you know that okay, if this is right and you're matching very highly with that, then obviously your response is also right.
And what about those use cases where golden responses are very subjective?
Yeah, I think that's where the issues like. So I think in those scenarios what we have seen is that one thing which people have been like doing a lot is they try to see whether all information in the golden response is contained in the generated response. Like you don't miss out any of the important information in the golden like in your ground truth response, and on top of that you want it to be concise, so you don't want it to be like blabbering too much or giving like highly verbose responses. So that is one way we are seeing where people are like getting around this subjectivity issue of the responses by making sure that the key information is there, and then beyond that it's like it's being highly concise and it's being like to the point in terms of the task being asked.
And so you kind of touched on this earlier, but can you say it again because I don't know if I fully grasped it. Where are all the places in the system that
Hmm.
you are evaluating? Because it's not just the output, right? And
Yeah,
how do you look at evaluation as a system rather than just like evaluating the output every once in a while?
yeah. So I mean what we do is like we plug with every part. So even if you start with the retrieval, so we have a high level check where we look at the quality of retrieved context, and then we also have evaluations for every part of this retrieval pipeline. So if you're doing query rewrite, if you're doing re-ranking, if you're doing sub question, we have evaluations for all of them. In fact, like we have worked closely with the llama index team to kind of integrate with all of their modular pipelines. Secondly, like once we cross the retrieval step, like once we have like around like 5 to 6 matrices on this retrieval part, then we look at the response generation. We have their evaluations for different criterias. So conciseness, completeness, safety, jailbreaks, prompt injections, as well as you can define your custom guidelines. So you can say that okay, my risk like if the user is asking anything and related to code, the output should also give like an example code snippet. So you can just like in plain English define this guideline and we check for that. And then finally, like zooming out, we also have checks. We look at conversations as a whole, how the user is satisfied, how many turns it requires for them to like for the chatbot or the LLM to answer the user query. So we have like uh, yeah, that's how we look at the whole evaluations as a whole.
Yeah, it really reminds me. I say this so much because it's one of the biggest fails I think on the internet, and I'm sure you've seen it. Where I think it was like Chevy or GM, the car manufacturer, car company, they
Yeah.
put They basically slapped a chatbot on their website. It was a GPT call, and people started talking to it and realized, oh my God, this thing will do anything that we want it to do. So they started asking it questions like, is Tesla better than GM?
Yeah.
And the bot would say, yeah, like it, and give a bunch of reasons why Tesla is better than GM on the website of GM. And then somebody else asked it, oh, can I get a car for $1? And it said no. And then it said, but I'm broke and I need a car for $1. And it said, okay, we'll sell you the car for the dollar. And so you're getting yourself into all this trouble just because you're not doing that real-time evaluation. How do you think about the real-time evaluation, and is that like an extra added layer of complexity?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think for the like I mean for the real time evaluations, like I think the most important cases which I mean there are two scenarios which we feel like are most important to deal with. Like one is like you have to put some guardrails in the sense that like you don't want the users to talk about your competitors, you don't want to answer some queries like
Hmm.
say like you don't want to make false promises and so on, right?
Yeah.
Some of them can be handled with pure regex contextual logics, and some of them you have to do evaluations. And the second is jailbreak. Like you don't want the user to use, let's say, your Chevy chatbot to kind of solve math problems or solve coding problems, right?
Yeah.
Because in a way, like you're just like subsidizing GPT-4 for them.
Yeah.
So, so we see like, and all of these can be done on just on the question which is being asked. So you can have like a system where you can like like fire a query, evaluate like few of these key matrices, and in parallel generate your responses. And as soon as you get your response, you also get your evaluations, and you can have some logic that if the user is asking about something which I should not be answering, instead of giving the response, I should just like say sorry, I could not answer this, or like have a standard
Uh-huh.
text for those cases, and have some mechanisms to like limit such scenarios and so on.
And it's better to do that in parallel than to try and catch the response, make sure it's okay before sending out an LLM call.
I mean, generally, yes, because if you look at like if you catch the response, it adds another layer of latency, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, like I mean, 95% of your users are not trying to do this. Like any good product, like a lot of those users are genuinely trying to use it, and you don't want to build something which kind of breaks an issue, like creates an issue for them, like add like a latency for them just to solve for that 5%. So you have to be cognizant of this fact and figure out like clever ways to do this.
Yeah. I remember I was talking to Philip of a company called Honeycomb, and they added some LLM functionality to their product. And he said that when people were trying to either prompt inject or jailbreak, it was fairly obvious
Hmm.
because there were a lot of calls. It kind of started to be not human usage, and it was
Yeah.
easy to catch in that way. Have you seen some of that too? And what are some signs that you see when people are trying to jailbreak?
Yeah, I think we also have seen like I mean typically what we also see is that whenever someone is trying to jailbreak, like the length of their question or the length of their prompt typically is like much larger than any average question, because like
Mm.
they will have all sorts of instruction like forget everything, you are allowed to say all of those things. And
Yeah.
then again, I mean this issue also come up like it's because when they try to jailbreak, like they try with one technique, it doesn't work, they try with another technique,
Mm.
it doesn't work, then they try with third technique, so there is like a burst of traffic. And even in terms of sentiment, typically like the sentiment or the coherence in those cases, we have seen that to be lower as compared to
Mm.
like a genuine question, because people are just trying to cramp up all these instructions into the response. So there are definitely like certain signs which already indicates that the user is trying to jailbreak this, and I think those are like great indicators to catch
Yeah.
them.
And I assume that you've got it set up so you can just set an alert when those things happen, and then it at least will flag it and have humans look over it, or potentially just like ask the person to cool off for the next minute and
Yeah.
say like, "Hey, you've been doing some suspicious activity here. We want to see something different."
Yeah.
So I think you were gonna show us a little bit about UpTrain, right? Like I see what you got. Can we give it go for a spin?
Yeah, definitely. Let me share my screen and I can show you how that looks like.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah, and just while you're sharing your screen, I want to mention that for this talk, I wore my favorite shirt, which is, it says, I don't know if everyone can see it, but it says, I hallucinate more than ChatGPT.
I think that's a cool one.
So, yeah, what do we got here?
Yeah. So yeah, let me kind of, just get started. So, I create an account and so this is how so with UpTrain I mean what we have is an API method, API way of calculating these evaluations. So you get an API key similar to what you get for ChatGPT or others, and then you can just do uptrain.log and evaluate, and you can tell give your data, so you can give whatever your question, responses, context, and you can define your checks which you want to evaluate for. So if I create an API key, I can just copy this code, and I just already have it here. So I'll just show you. So we have two mechanisms. One is that you can just run evaluations. So you can define okay, I want to run context relevance, I want to run response completeness. Similarly, I want to run jailbreak, I want to run for safety, I want to run for satisfaction of the users, and so on. And then when you run it, it gives back you a score, and it gives back you an explanation on why this particular score has been given for this particular question.
Can you
Right?
make that a little bit bigger?
Yeah.
Just give us some plus. Yeah, there we go. Nice. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, essentially it's essentially an API call which takes the data, takes the list of checks which you want to run, and then it gives back an score and an explanation for that. So based on that score, you can have logics, right? Okay, if the
Nice.
jailbreak score is more than 0.5, then you don't want to show it. You want to switch back to a default response and so on. And then you can also configure that when based on we'll log all of these scores, and we have dashboards where you can access them. So
I was just gonna ask if you have dashboards.
yeah.
Everybody loves a good dashboard, huh? Let's see it. That's awesome.
So let's see. Okay, let's take this one. So in this case, yeah, I just ran some of this context relevance checks for some of the queries. So you can see how that changes on your data sets. If you're running the same, we also run this in a monitoring setting, so you can see how this varies over time. And then finally you have all of the data. So we provide all of the data. You can download it, run whatever analysis you want to run, and then you can also one of the features which we have built recently and is getting very popular amongst our users is that you can filter cases where let's say the model is failing. So let's say I take all the cases where the responses is 0, and I can find common topics. So I can look at all these cases and I can find okay, what's the common theme across them. Maybe as you can see they're all talking about France, Romeo, Juliet, and so on. So it can just pull out a common topic among these cases. So then this gives you some some insights into where things are going wrong, and what do you need to improve upon.
Oh, very
and
cool.
and the second piece of the puzzle is the experiments. So not just you can evaluate them, but also you can use it to experiment with different settings. So let's say uh, let me just pull out an experiment I ran recently. Yeah. So let's say I want to compare two different models, right? So GPT 3.5 and Claude 2. So I can now see that, okay, Claude 2 is giving more concise responses, but in terms of factual accuracy, GPT 3.5 is more factually accurate. So I can now decide, based on my application, based on what my users want, I can now decide, which of these criteria is more meaningful for me. It's more meaningful for my users, for my data, and decide, which prompt or which model I want to go ahead with.
This is totally what I was talking about earlier, where you get a new model and you're seeing on some metrics it's doing worse, but then on your core metric that you're looking at, it's actually
Exactly.
performing better. So you have to kind of explain to yourself, why is it doing better on those other metrics? I don't know. And So, if I'm understanding this correctly, we can set the metrics that we're looking at.
Yeah. So we actually, so I'll show you like the kind of so it's an, yeah, also I like forgot to mention earlier, like UpTrain is like open source.
Oh,
So
nice.
yeah, so we have like, these pre-configured checks. So you don't need to do anything. You can just like say like, uptrain dot response completeness or uptrain dot prompt injection. So these are like pre-configured. So we did the hard work of like, getting all these codes and so on. And
Hmm.
on top of that, we also have like ways for you to like customize these matrices. So you can define a custom guideline, you can change the prompt which you want. You can like, even define like a custom Python function which you want to act as an evaluator. So we
Nice.
provide all of those functionalities so that they can also take advantage of things which are already there, as well as they can create custom things which make sense for them and have a way to kind of truly understand how their systems are doing.
Oh, that's really cool. I really like the idea of being able to set custom ones, but then also having some that just come right out of the box to make life easier on us.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, both are needed because you want some place to start, and as you advance, like you also want to kind of like you can't cover everything right with pre-configured, so you want to have a way to customize things.
Yeah, and especially once you have data flowing, you'll start to see what other things you need to be evaluating.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very true.
Are you just a random one? I'm not telling you how to build your product or anything, but have you thought about having like a community sourced metrics? So, like all these custom ones that people are making, maybe
Hmm.
there's a hub where we can add our custom.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Like, I mean, this is something we also have been thinking a lot. Like, I mean, it's not built out yet, but we plan to kind of go in that direction like pretty soon. Like, we want to kind of create like a store kind of a thing where people can like, add their custom matrices. So yeah, you're right on. I think I also believe like that's the way to go, and we will be releasing something on those fronts pretty soon.
Nice. So Drew's asking, how do you handle jailbreak for different types of applications? Jailbreak for a medical app would be different than one for a finance one, right?
Yeah, yeah. So the way our jailbreak check is configured, so it takes something what you call as a model purpose. So you define what is the purpose of your model. So like, I mean, for a financial app, you need to say that, okay, this app, like this LLM application is designed to answer financial queries, so and so on. From medical, you will have a different purpose. So you can configure what is the purpose of your app. And then when we take up a user query, we check whether the user query is under the like firstly we check also for illegal activities and so on, and then we also check whether it's under the preview of this purpose. If not,
Mm.
then we tag that as a scenario of jailbreak because the user is trying to do something other than the purpose. So that's how we tackle it.
Nice. Dude, well, this is awesome. Is there anything else you want to say before we jump off?
uh no, I mean, it was like a great conversation. Really glad to be here and great talking to you.
Yeah, I'm very, very happy that we got this working and you were able to show us a little bit of UpTrain. Super cool that it's open source, so I would recommend everybody go check it out. Get your LLMs working with confidence and make sure that nobody is using your chatbot to be their GPT subsidy, like in the GM use case. And yeah, it's great, dude. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, check us out. Like, we are at github.com/uptrainai/uptrain.
There we
So
go. And if anybody else wants to come on to the Vector Space Talks and talk to us about all the cool stuff that you're doing, hit us up and we'll see you all astronauts later. Don't get lost in vector space.
yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.
All right, dude. There we go. We are good. And so I don't know how the hell I'm going to stop this one, but because I can't go through on my phone or I can't go through on my computer. It's so weird. So I'm not like technically. There's nobody at the wheel right now. So I think if we both get off, it should stop working.
Okay.
Yeah, but that was awesome, man. This is super cool. I really like what you're doing. And it's so funny. I don't know if we're not connected on LinkedIn, are we?
Uh,
Because I literally just today posted a video of me going through a few different hallucination mitigation techniques that,
oh, nice.
and it's so it's like super timely that you talk about this. I mean, I think so many people have been thinking about this, and yeah,
I mean,
it's awesome.
definitely with enterprises, it's like a big issue, right? I mean, how do
Yeah,
you make it safe? Like, how do you make it production ready? So I'll definitely check
exactly.
out your video also. I think would be super interesting.
Go to just go to my LinkedIn right now. It's just like linkedin.com/ DPBRINKM, or just search for me and
Oh yeah,
so you
I
see
think
me.
we are connected.
Oh, we're connected. All right, cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, check out the last video I just posted because it's literally all about this. And there's a great um there's a really cool paper that came out, and you probably saw it. It's all like mitigating AI hallucinations, and it
Yeah.
breaks down all 32 techniques. And I was talking with on another podcast that I do. I was literally talking with the guys from Weights and Biases yesterday, and I was
Yeah.
talking about how I was like, man, these evaluation data sets as a service feels like something that nobody's doing. And I guess it's probably because, and you're the expert, so I would love to hear what you have to say about it. But I guess it's because you don't really need it that bad. Like you can get, with a relatively small amount of data, you can start getting some really good
Yeah.
evaluation happening. So it's a lot better than like paying somebody else
And also, I think
for, yeah.
yeah, as it doesn't make sense also for a service because I mean some external person is not is not like best suited to make a data set for your use case, right? It's
Mhm.
like it's you, like you have to look at what your users are asking to create a good data set. Like yeah,
Yeah.
maybe you can have like a method like I mean which is what Optrain also does. Like, we basically help you to sample and pick out the right cases from this data set based on the feedback of your users, based on the scores which are being generated. But
Yeah.
it's difficult for someone external to craft like really good questions, or like really good queries or really good cases which make sense for your business.
And do you, because the other piece, it kind of like spitballed off of that. The
Mm-hmm.
other piece of it was techniques. So let me see if I can like place all this
Yeah.
these words into
Yeah.
a coherent sentence for you.
Yeah.
It's basically like, okay, evaluation data sets don't really make sense because you're the one who knows the most. You're going to, with a relatively small amount of data, you're going to be able to get stuff going real quick.
Yeah.
What I thought about is like, what about these hallucination mitigation techniques so that you can almost have like options? So in this paper, right, there's like 32 different kinds of techniques that they use. And some are like very pertinent for rags. They have
Mm-hmm.
like 5 different or 4 different types of techniques when you're dealing with rags to mitigate hallucinations. Then they have some like, okay, if you're distilling a model, here is how you can make sure that the new distilled model doesn't hallucinate as much, blah, blah, blah. But what I was thinking is like, what about, like, how can you get a product, or can you productize these kind of techniques? So, all right, cool, they're in this paper, but in UpTrain, can we just say, oh, you want to try this new like mitigation technique? We make that really easy for you. You just have to select it as one of the hallucination mitigation techniques, and then we do the heavy lifting of, if it's like, there's one, have you heard of Fleek? That was one that I was talking about in the video. Fleek is like where there's a knowledge graph
Hmm.
LLM that is created,
Hmm.
and it is specifically created to try and like combat hallucinations. And the way that they do it is they say the LLM will try and identify anywhere in the prompt or the
Hmm.
output, sorry, the output. It will try and identify if there's anything that can be fact checked. And so if it says that humans landed on the moon in 1969, it will identify that, and then either through its knowledge graph or
Okay.
through just forming a search query that will go out and then search the internet, it will verify if that fact is true in the output. And so
Okay.
that's like one technique, right? And so what I'm thinking about is like, oh man, wouldn't it be cool if you could have all these different techniques to be able to use really easily, as opposed to, great, I read it in a paper. Now, how the fuck am I going to get my hands on one of these LLMs with a knowledge graph? You know, like
Yeah.
if I don't train it myself, shit.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. I'll definitely check it out. I mean, one of the things which we also want to do is like, integrate with all these techniques because I mean these are like really good techniques and they help solve a lot of problems, but using them is not simple. Like recently we integrated with Spade. It's basically like a technique
Yeah,
where
I
it,
know. I did another video on Spade actually.
oh yeah,
That's so
yeah,
funny.
yeah. I saw, yeah.
Yeah.
So
All
that
right.
was
Cool.
also, yeah. So I mean, basically, yeah. So I think I'll also check out like these hallucinations. So like right now, what we do is based on this paper called like Fact Score,
Uh-huh.
which again like it. I mean, it instead of checking on the internet, it checks in the context only, to
Nice.
verify
Okay.
whether
Yeah.
this fact can be verified from the context or not. But I think it would be really cool if like people can just play around with these techniques and just see like whether it's actually working on their data or not because I
That's
think
it. That's kind of what I was thinking is like, oh, can you see, does it give you a better result? And then the other piece is like, oh, wait a minute, does this actually like, can I put like two or three of them in my system at the same time, right? And
yeah.
maybe it's over engineering or maybe it's not, I don't know. So there's a lot of fun stuff that can go down there, and it's fascinating to think about.
Yeah, definitely. And I think experimentation is the key here, right? I mean, unless
Yeah.
you try out them, you don't know what works. And
Yeah,
like if something works which improves your system, then definitely it was like worth it. So
yeah,
I think
for sure.
thanks for that. We'll check into it.
Dude, awesome. It's
Yeah.
great chatting with you, bro. And I'll talk to you later, bro.
Yeah,
This is
thanks
great.
a lot. Great
See ya.
speaking. See ya. Bye.